I don't know how many of you remember when Nikke released, they had this system in place, a combat power penalty system in place, where if you were 1 point below the recommended combat power, you would suffer a significant damage reduction that was towards the enemies, and you would take exponentially more damage from said enemies. Now, if you were 1 point over the recommended combat power, so this is a 2 combat power difference of potentially tens of thousands, you would deal substantially more damage to the enemies and take substantially less damage from them. Players revolted against the studio behind Nikke. They were very upset. Nikke ultimately ended up very strongly nerfing that combat power penalty that was present. This was in response to the negative reception of that feature. And unfortunately, for those of you that have been playing Higan Eruthyll, you probably already noticed, but for those of you that aren't and are looking forward to playing it, potentially interested in it in some capacity, I was redirected to this thread from one of our viewers that goes on to note that Higan Eruthyll has the exact same system in place that shows the drastic difference in terms of damage given and damage received based on the combat power difference. Before we go ahead and jump into the Higan Eruthyll drama, I want to take a moment here to thank our incredible patrons over on Patreon. You guys are absolute legends. Thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it. Also, if you have a moment, consider following me over on Twitch. I stream Gacha games there every weekend, and am in the process of actually streaming a new Gacha MMO today. So the threading question was posted by Daidi as 1791. If you were considering playing Higan Eruthyll, you should know it has CP penalty and it's worse than you think. Now, I'm not a fan of having a CP penalty in a game. I do not think you should deal less damage and receive more damage if you are 1 combat power below the recommended combat power. I do not think you should deal more damage and receive less damage if you increase your combat power by 2 out of tens of thousands. That makes absolutely no sense to me. But I know there are going to be people out there, for whatever reason, that defend it. And you're welcome to defend it all you want. This is a subjective opinion, of course. I just think it's an absolute fucking trash system. This system was introduced back in February 23. We're on April 17th, and it is still not dealt with. To give some context, here are some pictures that I did as a test to see how brutal the CP penalty is on a 61k CP required stage, approximately, and using the damage taken as a variable. Now you can see the substantial difference in numbers right here. He said this had a 61,000 combat power, recommended combat power. So here he is at 61,000 combat power. Here he is at 58,000 combat power. This should be a negligible difference in damage received. From that tiny variable difference, he went from taking 1,175 damage to 1,454 damage. This is, mind you, the same character with the same gear, the same level, the same stats. The only difference was the overall combat power of the group. So what he could have done was replace one of his high ranked characters, high leveled, high geared characters with a level 1 character. I'm going to assume here that's what he did. Now with a 15,000 combat power difference, he went from taking 1,175 damage to 2,493. Once again, same character. Further, I'm assuming he removed quite a few members of his team for this. He went from 61,000 combat power to 30,000 combat power, and went from receiving 1,100 damage to 11,000 damage. That drastic a change should not be possible. And again, this is why I think this system is absolute horseshit, because the further you are beneath the recommended power, the more you're going to struggle with the game, which means the game is gating you from progression. You need to grind certain characters, you need to grind certain gear, you need to grind certain materials, and that takes time. He goes on to state pretty much what we just covered. I just want to warn the people that want to give the game a shot. If you suddenly get ranked in a stage that you are under the CP required, just know it's not your fault or your comp or the enemies being hard. It's this dumb system fault and how badly implemented it is. If you still want to try it, go ahead, but it's better to be informed. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some of these comments in response. I really hate these kinds of systems. Why bother picking units based on elements and synergy and classes? If I can just sort my power level and pick the top X character for my team and stomp the stages because I have bigger numbers and some arbitrarily defined threshold. Exactly. It doesn't matter how good your team is, how good your team composition is, how good their gear is, or the synergy between their characters or their elemental affinities with the enemies. If you're 1 point beneath the recommended combat power, doesn't matter. Yeah, I already uninstalled it. You can clear any stage with a decent team on auto if your CP is 0.000000001 higher than enemies, but your team will struggle heavily if it's lower by the same points as well. Do not understand that logic. I got bored too fast. The game looks nice, but in my time with it, it plays like a glorified auto battler. The CP penalty takes away any incentive to be anything more than an auto battler. And the most important part, the game is boring. Honestly, I played Higan Eruthyll. I think this combat power penalty is an atrocious feature to have, but I honestly don't think it was a boring game. I think it was actually a pretty decent game. Had some pretty decent combat, some pretty decent graphics. I don't remember if its story was any good. I think it was really drawn out and slow, but at its core, I feel like Higan Eruthyll was actually not a bad game. I know people are gonna take this video and immediately jump to the conclusion that I'm hating on it. No, what I disagree with is the combat power penalty system. I had an issue with it in Nikke. I have an issue with it in Higan Eruthyll. I will have an issue with it in Honkai Star Rail if Honkai Star Rail has it. I will have an issue with it in Wuthering Waves if Wuthering Waves implements this feature. This is a feature that should not exist. The success rate of your encounter, of the battle that you are actively engaged in, should reflect your characters, the gear they have on, the levels they are, and the synergy they have between each other and the enemies. The course of battle should not be influenced by a 0.01% difference in combat power. That is ridiculous. And I'm glad a lot of people in the comment section seem to agree with that. But what do you guys think? You think having a combat power penalty in-game is a good thing, is a bad thing, really makes no difference whatsoever? Are you having fun in Higan Eruthyll? Let me know down in the comment section below because I'm genuinely curious to hear from you. Now, if Higan Eruthyll isn't your kind of game, absolutely no problem. Got you covered with 2 different videos on screen right now that might be of more interest to you. One featuring a list of every confirmed Gacha releasing this month. The other featuring another Gacha releasing later this year that I think actually might hold some potential.